I'm not suggesting that we don't welcome public comment, but we certainly do, and there will be a number of instances where that will be available. But I would ask all of you, to the best of your ability, keep your comments directed towards the issue at hand as we move forward. At this time, I would ask Justin Kraske to summarize the notice of public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The Public Service Commission will conduct a public hearing in the matter of the application for approval of avoided cost tariff Schedule QF1 filed by NorthWestern Energy. The public hearing will commence today at 9 a.m. at the PSC's business office. The hearing will continue from day to day as necessary. In its application, NorthWestern requests that the PSC approve a new QF1 tariff on both an interim and a final basis. The proposed avoided cost rates would apply to qualifying facilities with a nameplate capacity of 3 megawatts or less. Standard rates for purchases from QFs are based on NorthWestern's avoided costs, which are reviewed by the PSC, made available to the public, and applicable to all contracts with qualifying facilities who do not choose to negotiate a different rate. In its application, NorthWestern proposes to decrease standard rates.
I'm going to object. MEIC is a formal intervener in this matter, represented by Ms. Harbine, and they have professional witnesses, and as an intervener, they are required to pre-file their testimony. It is completely inappropriate for MEIC to both appear as a formal party in this proceeding, represented by Ms. Harbine, and then attempt to appear as a public witness. This commission has never allowed that to happen.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I believe Mr. Fady is here on behalf of MEIC's significant membership in Montana and wishes to make very brief comments on their behalf.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I renew my objection. Mr. Fady is not an attorney, and in fact, his entity, the person he works for, is represented by Ms. Harbine. It is inappropriate for them to appear both as a formal party and attempt to appear as a public witness.
And given the fact that Mr. Fady introduced himself as a representative of MEIC, Mr. Ucker will sustain that objection. Mr. Fady, your excuse, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Mr. Fady has some written comments that MEIC members have provided. May I ask that he be permitted to leave those with Mr. Osquist?
He certainly may.
I'm co-chair of 350 Missoula, now known as 350 Montana. We also have a series of written comments, essentially over 750 petitions signed from Montanans through all over the state, indicating their strong desire to see the state of Montana and the utility companies in Montana move to renewables as quickly as possible. We understand that while your overall obligation is always protection of the ratepayer, that your specific focus right now is setting of a specific rate. And we understand that's a technical process. Part of that process involves coming up with a percentage adjustment to the nameplate cost. And NorthWestern Energy has come in and asked you to utilize a percentage number that is very far below what has been accepted by other public service commissions, what experts generally indicate is appropriate in this particular part of the country. Using that low number that they have asked you to include, that low percentage, is going to play a major role in whether solar facilities are really competitive and whether solar facilities become a part of the electric grid in Montana or not. They're asking you basically to use 9.6% as an adjustment to nameplate capacity, while the general consensus seems to be the number should be somewhere around 40%. The foreseeable result of that, given NorthWestern's planning documents, is that if we don't see solar becoming a significant part of the grid, there's going to be the construction of 13 natural gas plants. I think we all know, and we can all look around and see that there is a strong shift going on in this country, in fact the whole world, away from fossil fuel generated sources of electricity to renewables. NorthWestern Energy is asking you to help them push the bet in the direction of the old technology, fossil fuels, and we're saying very strongly we think that is a big mistake for a lot of different reasons, including the final impact it's going to have on the ratepayers down the road. We think back in history and look, nobody has ever done well by betting on the old technology when the new technology's been coming into play. State of Montana originally received most of its freight shipments in and a lot of its people by riverboat. As soon as the rails came, if you were invested in riverboats, you were done within 20 years. Once they switched from steam engines on those rails to diesel electric, the last place you wanted to be invested, the last thing you wanted to be putting your money into was Baldwin Locomotive Works. NorthWestern Energy is asking you to make it easier for them to continue investing in the old technology. And you're looking at a cost, ultimately, with that old technology that is going to be put on the ratepayers for probably somewhere in the area of 25 years. When you look at the trends that are happening today in the switch to renewables, that is most likely going to end up being a stranded cost, a cost well above what energy is going to be available for the renewable sources. So we think it's a big mistake to give them a number that is well out of the norm so that they can stick with the old technology rather than move forward with the rest of the world. Thank you.
I'm co-chair of 350 Montana. I understand that you're implementing policy today, the nitty-gritty of policy, but I wanted to speak to the broader context. The petitions that we turned in today, the 765 petitions that we turned in today, is backed up by a survey that was done in September, this past September, of Montana voters, a bipartisan survey. There's intense interest for moving on toward renewable energy. The majority want action on climate change. There's strong support for clean energy, energy efficiency. Solar and wind is hugely popular. 90% support solar energy, 86% support wind. It's time to move to this new infrastructure. The NorthWestern Energy procurement plan did a very good job of assessing where we need to go in the future. And we have a choice here to stay with the fossil fuel infrastructure or to move to the new infrastructure. Once we build the new infrastructure, the energy from that point on is free. And I would encourage you to keep that in mind with your decisions today. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Smith. We have exhausted our first 15-minute period for public comment, and we'll now move on. I'm sorry. No, we started 10 after. We've got 5 minutes left. I apologize.
Also part of 350, and I know today it's part of the rates that NorthWest Energy is willing to pay for solar energy, and I'm concerned that if they decrease those rates, especially a significant amount, that it will discourage as opposed to encourage solar installment and solar jobs, and that is increasing rapidly across the country and especially in Montana. That's a huge effect on Montana that we need those jobs. And also I've read that other states that want our energy are starting to press for carbon-free energy. They may not want our carbon emission energy that we might plan on producing, so we should be leaning towards clean energy for lots of different reasons, and I thank you for considering all these reasons.
And also a member of 350 Montana. My comments really are zeroing in on a particular article that was put out in August of 16 by the Consumer Report. And it summarized some of the issues that are going on with solar nationwide. They were responding to a nationwide effort by a lot of utilities, Arizona, California, and other states that are trying to restrain or add tariffs, add costs to solar. But yet, as they point out in this article, I'll quote a couple of lines here. It says, research shows that solar customers actually have a positive impact on utility finances because they reduce electricity demand and therefore reduce the tremendous expense of adding capacity. So the Consumer Union that basically writes the Consumer Report, you may recall the Consumer Report's pretty renowned for a lot of its work on products, obviously cars and everything like that. But they stepped in, they commissioned a study in February of 2016, basically that echoed those findings that have been done by other research. And they added that the cost-benefit analysis done by utilities should be viewed with skepticism. The report by research showed that raising fixed charges creates other problems and does not represent the true cost of solar. Thank you.
Missoula. I moved there 4 years ago from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a retired physician. I've been coming to Montana for some 15 years before that. And over those 20 years, I've seen a great deal of evidence for some really scary changes in the climate here in Montana. It's much more in your face here in Montana than it ever was in Atlanta. When I was practicing medicine in Atlanta, I would often, I tried to base my diagnoses, my treatment suggestions on the best science, the best evidence I could come up with. And sometimes when I did that, because that's of course what the public expects of physicians, I had the difficult task of telling people news that they didn't want to hear. Usually when that would happen, I would ask them to get second opinions, third opinions, fourth opinions perhaps. And generally when people would hear the same thing from several different physicians, they would accept the suggestions for treatment, but not always. And in those not always situations, I would usually take this approach. I would say, well, you may not want to believe or may not accept this diagnosis, but with this treatment that we have to offer you, which is not all that costly, not all that dangerous, we think your outcome will be a lot better if you accept this than if you don't. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are or what you accept. It seems to me that's directly analogous to the situation we're facing with climate change. That we have a choice here where we can go down the renewable path. And by the way, I neglected to mention that I'm also with 350 Montana. Go down the renewable path. Go down the path of continuing on with fossil fuels. It seems to me that the conservative and prudent thing to do would be, since renewables are now, wasn't true 10 years ago, but nowadays are on a par cost-wise and in some cases even cheaper than the fossil fuel path. That the prudent thing to do is, facing the uncertainties that we are about climate change, is to go down the safe path, the renewables path, and hope that, well, maybe we'll find out 20 years from now that things, the predictions made by scientists were exaggerated, or maybe sunspots are to blame or whatever. But we will, the cost, the downside cost of going the safe path seems to me suggests that that's the prudent and conservative way to go, and I hope the Commission will consider and think along these lines in the future. And I appreciate very much the opportunity for making comments. Thank you.